Hello, and welcome to the Behavior Education Connection, the podcast that works to connect the world of behavior analysis and the world of education. We focus on topics important to behavior analysts who work in the public schools and those who support them. Join us and spend time gaining insights and ideas as our host talks with fellow behavior analysts as well as other experts in the field.
Hello, welcome back to the Behavior Education Connection. I'm your host, Dr. Selena Layden, and I am here today with Dr. Kira Austin. Hi, Kira.
Hi, how are you?
I am great. Can you introduce yourself to our audience?
Sure. I am currently a behavior analyst for Richmond Public Schools in Virginia. I have a long background in ABA. I'm going on year 20 this year. Started off as a behavior tech, worked in public schools, worked in the clinical setting, worked at the university level, and now I'm back at public schools.
You have definitely had a lot of different experiences, so I think today's conversation is going to be super interesting. What we're focusing on today is kind of how you align all sorts of different components of our jobs as school-based behavior analysts. And so I want to start with kind of a broad stroke. We have our science, and then we have what the school district is requiring, and we have what our state requires, and we have federal guidelines. So how do you kind of think about how to make that all work together?
That's a good question. When we think about our best practices, there has been periods of time in ABA's history where there's been a very rigid application of our science. And I kind of came into ABA at a time where it was very much discrete trials, sit at a table, touch things kind of deal. And really over the past 20 years, just expanding what does applied really mean? And that looks really different based off of the context, working in homes versus working in a private day school versus working in a classroom with a teacher with 30 kids. The application has to look different because of not just what's possible, but all the other external environmental factors that influence the application of the interventions. And so I really think that as behavior analysts, we have to learn how to be more flexible and adaptable in our thinking, really understand what is the root of the intervention, like what are we really trying to accomplish here, to be able to design interventions that are flexible enough to work in the setting, but still within best practices to achieve the desired outcomes.
Yeah, and I think you make a couple of really great points. One being, when we're applying our science, we have to think about the contextual factors of wherever we're applying it. And it doesn't matter if it's a home, if it's a school, if it's the community, if it's a business, it doesn't matter. There are contextual factors that will affect what we are able to be effective with and not be effective with. I think the other big thing that is really important that I think a lot about is at the end of the day, we want to change behavior in a socially significant way. And so if we come in and say this is the one right way to do things, I don't know how effective that really is over time.
I wholeheartedly agree. When we think about generalization, if I only taught you to do it this one way in this one contextual setting, how is the individual that we're working with going to be able to apply that? Because the environment and the world that we live in is not the same. Every environment is different. And so I think it's actually a really key part of generalization is flexibility. And I think that can be hard, especially for some younger BCBAs. It's like, but this is the science and this is how it must happen. And recognizing, yeah, it may take longer to get to what we would identify as skill acquisition, but that skill actually is more flexible because we taught it through a different modalities and different ways of that application of the intervention to make it a more successful and permanent behavior.
Yeah, I think that's one key component. The other one I think a lot about is acceptability, because at the end of the day, most school-based behavior analysts don't live in the same classroom every day, all day long. And so we may be supporting a particular set of classrooms, but we leave at some point, right? And so if that teacher or the other folks that are in that classroom don't accept what we're trying to do, they're not going to do it when we leave.
Oh, absolutely. Social validity is huge, especially in the public school setting. If it's too complicated, it's not going to happen. If you can't do it in a short period of time effectively, it's not going to happen. If you don't give the teacher enough different scenarios about how to respond when the behavior happens, then when a new behavior pops up, they're not going to know how to respond, so they're not going to do it. I think that also really especially comes into play with data collection. Teachers work so hard. They do amazing work. But documentation is, they're not trained the same way that we are in
Right.
documentation. Even special educators, they get trained in data collection, but it doesn't look at the same level as we've been trained as behavior analysts. And so making data, I think that's probably the part where I've had to grow the most is like, it's not about, documenting every single trial. It's not about every minute of the day, and getting really flexible about when and how teachers collect data. And that doesn't mean that there isn't validity and reliability to the data, but it more often to me, it's reduced frequency, or reduced time of day that the data are being collected, to make it something that's really manageable for teachers when they're working towards standards of learning, they're working towards curriculum and content development, where they're working to manage all these other interventions and six other kids' behaviors. How
Right.
do we really make that feasible in the classroom?
Yeah, and I think that actually leads me to I think talking about a specific application of this would be great. So, one of the things that has happened in the last several months, actually about a year ago, the US Department of Education released new guidance around functional behavior assessments and behavior intervention plans. Of course, as probably happened in most states, our state also created new guidelines on what that looks like. And I do want to say, I give Virginia a lot of credit. They incorporated a lot of stakeholder feedback, including and purposely including BCBAs, which I think is great because I think there's a lot of good things in there. And I feel pretty good about the guidelines as they came out versus others that I've seen historically. But that said, it is not the exact, they didn't just take the science of behavior analysis and FBAs and say, okay, that's exactly how you do it. So, how do you take, you have federal guidance, you have state guidelines. I'm sure your district has created their own guidelines and you were probably part of that. But how do you mesh all of that to make that work?
That's a great question, and you are absolutely right. We were very lucky in Virginia, lots of stakeholders. Um, in fact, when I came into Richmond Public Schools 5 years ago, we were not pleased with the lack of depth of the current FBA BIP template that our district was using. And so myself and a colleague, Daniel Irwin, we updated it based off of best practices and application to public schools. And we were really able to kind of provide that input and feedback to the state as they were developing the state guidelines. So it was really nice when the state guidelines came out to really see, oh, that mirrors what we had already developed. And
They
so
listened.
they did, and it was really nice. So, needless to say, when the updated guidelines came out in April, we had some changes to make, but not significant changes to make to what we were already doing as a district. So that has been really nice, but I know that that is not a luxury that all states have. And so I think it really goes down to how you provide training and how you develop processes and procedures, because sometimes a guideline can say, look at the function of behavior, and they have like no guidance whatsoever about how teachers should do that, and teachers don't necessarily know what that means. So
Well,
then,
and I want to interject for just a second because I think it's important to remember guidance and guidelines that come from Department of Ed is usually not a how-to.
correct.
It is usually just kind of a broader overview of what needs to be rather than exactly step by step how to. So Your point is
Yes.
well taken.
Yeah. And so, um, really having dedicated personnel, we are very blessed. We have three BCBAs within our district, and I know that makes us very lucky to be able to be embedded in schools, provide training, be that boots on the ground of like, this is what this really means. And I think that that's where a lot of school districts flounder is they receive guidance, they receive guidelines, or they get told you have to write a new policy, but then it's like, and then what? And what does that actual application look like in being able to guide and support teachers? So one of the things that we did when we updated our FBA BIP um, processes in response to the most recent guidelines, we actually developed an FBA development checklist. And so it's just a Google Doc, it's nothing fancy, but it does give step-by-step directions. We linked every single document that they might want to reference. So, hey, get parent permission. And we say where to go to get that done. Then we say, hey, start the FBA draft, link it to the document. Hey, you are going to need to do an observation. Here's the link to the observation and so forth. Because I do think sometimes we as central office staff or as behavior analysts, it's like, oh, well, of course that's the process. And we have all of these resources, and then we're like, why isn't anybody using our beautiful resources? And it's because we haven't made them truly accessible and easy to use for people who really just have limited time and being really mindful of that. We've also really cut down um, some of the depth. I can remember when we first rolled out our FBA bit training about 5 years ago, um, our slide deck was literally almost 400 slides. I mean, we were going to teach you all the things in one training. And just realizing that that's not really feasible. One, that's too much information overload. But two, breaking down things into essential components um, to make them digestible bits for people to actually apply in the classroom.
Well, and I think one of the things I think a lot about when we're training, and let's just be really clear, I really believe FBAs are a pretty complex assessment,
Oh, I
right?
agree.
Like you can't just say, okay, and I recognize this is not the checklist that you developed, but I have seen school divisions are like, oh, just do these 5 steps and then you'll be done with your FBA. And I'm like, well, I mean, you have something, but I don't know that I would call that like an effective FBA. Because the reality is if you have a student who requires an FBA, you have a student who's probably engaging in some pretty complex behaviors because foundational behavior management is not working for them. That's why they continue to engage in these behaviors that are now leading to the FBA, presumably. So assuming that's all true, we can't just go in and check things off a list and go, "Oh, well then this is clearly why this is happening." And so then this is the intervention that they need. But because it's such a complex thing, I think it's so hard to balance. I want to give you all the information
Yeah.
because I know that you need all of this, but I also know I can't give you to your example, I can't give you 400 slides in a day and say, "Okay, now you know everything that you need to know." And let's be quite honest, as behavior analysts, we have I mean, there's an entire class you take on basically how to do an FBA, and you have to practice and all of those things to become proficient at it. And yes, special educators do get coursework on FBAs, but it's not an entire course.
Hmm.
Um, General educators don't get a lot on it at all, hardly. I think they talk about it maybe, but there's no, they don't practice it as far as I'm aware. There may be programs that do that, but generally that's not a requirement. And so I think it's a lot to assume teachers just should know how to do this. So my question in all of this explanation is how do you find that balance of I need to get you all the things that you need to know so you can do this effectively, but I can't give you 17 days of training to get you there.
For sure. Um, I find that teachers really know their students. And they have a lot of information and examples about student behavior that is what we would consider anecdotal, but it's incredibly valuable nuggets that just need to be plugged and chugged into the right places. They just don't know where to put it. And so, really developing some like key guidance questions. One of the things that I like about our particular template is we have a section of like antecedents that trigger the interfering behavior, and then antecedents that are less likely to trigger the behavior. So kind of flipping that coin of like when is the student doing well, and like what's happening in those situations. I find that that's probably the one I have to do the most question digging around. And they're like, the behavior happens all day, because we know that that is a pretty common response. But then I'm like, okay, well, does it happen during lunch? No, not really. Does it happen during recess? No, not really. What about art? No, that doesn't really happen there either. And so really kind of doing that digging, especially after their first response is, I don't know, or it happens all the time, or it happens everywhere. Um, Maybe it's persistence in questioning that I have found to be really helpful in the FBA process in particular. I will find once we've gone through all of that and we kind of get to the hypothesis phase, we've made it very clear. Previous FBAs I've seen, it's just like a very broad, like, what do you think the hypothesis is? What do you think the function is? And, in the past, I've seen teachers put things like revenge or they want to be in control. And we've done some pretty significant training around it's to access or avoid, escape something, and kind of bring it down into those three categories of attention, tangible, and sensory. And teachers are pretty quick to be able to put it in the correct category when those options are narrowed down. And so I do think sometimes there's so much out there. I don't know how to kind of hone in. And so I've found that to be a pretty clear way to get through the FBA process. The part that I still really see my teachers struggling with is we've identified the function and then we pick interventions that don't match the function at all. And so that's really where we're kind of investing our time this year, is trying to make that more clear of, hey, it's got, and we've been preaching it for years, but you're like, that messaging needs to change because they still are not understanding that. And I can remember trying to roll out the competing pathways model, if you guys are familiar with that. It's pretty excellent kind of tool to guide you through what's the acceptable alternative behavior and what's the ultimate socially appropriate behavior that you're looking for. And it went right over teachers' heads. They weren't ready for it. And I was able to do that in most recent district-wide training with our instructional compliance coordinators, which are special ed coordinators for school buildings. And really saw a lot of light bulb moments go off. And it just was really nice to be like, yes, that's what we've been talking about for the past 5 years, is now go through and select an intervention that matches that function. Because I even would be sitting in meetings and be like, well, how does that still help them get attention? And that connection piece of like, oh, it needs to still get them attention was not connecting with the staff I was working with. And it's not because it's not possible. It's more, I just didn't frame it in a way that was user friendly. And so I really think that's a large part of our work is BCBAs is it Einstein who says you have to know it well enough to be able to teach it to others, or you don't know the information well enough? I feel like I'm butchering that quote. But
the sentiment is there.
Yeah, yeah. And so you go through school, you learn things, you're like, I think I understand that. And you explain it to people the way that you learned it, and then you're like, well, I don't know how else to explain it. That's just what it is. And really being able to distill things down to their core essence, and really what is the root of the science, to be able to re-explain it to people in several different ways based off of who you're supporting, really demonstrates your own personal mastery of the science and ability to kind of be able to make those real world connections for the people you're working with.
Yeah, and one of the things that I've spent a lot of time thinking about lately is I've been helping support, our FBA BIP initiative within our state, which is separate from this, but I've seen a lot of teachers. I've worked with a lot of staff in my career. I've done this a lot, and what I've kind of come to the conclusion is that we can't just assume exactly what you just said is we got to the hypothesis, we've identified the function, and now we just can move forward because that problem solving that has to go into that, that is a skill set in and of its own. And developing that skill set of, well, we determined that this is an attention seeking behavior. We've determined that they're trying to get away from some tangible, whatever the case may be. And then moving to, so then what intervention are we going to put in place? And I think in our attempt to try to simplify this, maybe we didn't teach how to do it very well. And I think your point is one I talk about a lot. When we only, and I'm a very tired phrase, but when we only have a hammer for a tool, then every problem is a nail. And I
Yeah.
think that that's what happens in behavior sometimes is people don't understand the underlying principles and concepts and the science. And so then it's like, well, these are the only interventions I really know, so we'll just apply those and see which one works. Which then the sad part is, why did we do the FBA to begin with?
Yeah. And I've even found, I mean, by the time you get to an FBA, the teachers have tried everything that's in their toolkit, or they wouldn't be
Exactly.
getting to this point where they need additional support. And so being like, well, what intervention do you want to pick? They don't know because they've already tried it. And so really being able to give them alternative options. One of the things that we did launch this year, and we're continuing to flesh out, we previously had like district-wide folders that had resources and things, but we actually launched a website, internal website, with all of our resources. But we've done this intervention corner, and we have reorganized them by function. So you see those students' primary function is attention. Then in intervention corner, you can pick attention and see corresponding interventions that can work with that. Because I think that's where people get stuck. They're like, well, token board, everything's a token board, or, everything's check in, check out, or, whatever it might be. Um, and those are definitely evidence-based effective interventions, but they might not necessarily match what we need when we need it and where we need it.
Exactly. And I do want to reiterate your point, and you made this very well. I think teachers work very hard. I think they're trying the very best they can. And if we're getting to an FBA, they've run out of what they know to do.
Yeah.
And they are asking for help. And so I do think that's where school-based behavior analysts can be really effective in being able to come in and say, well, let me help you problem solve through this. Let's think about where we've been. And it might be the teacher did something, and if we just tweak it a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
it'll work. Or it might be, nope, that was not what we should be trying. And what we've learned is that doesn't work. And now we
Yeah.
need to move forward with something else. And both of those options are okay. But that's, I think, where we can bring a layer of expertise that can be really helpful for schools and school teams.
Absolutely. Definitely think it's the problem solving part. And being that thought partner, I love how you kind of frame that. It has to be a collaborative process. You cannot come in as the BCBA with your expert hat on and tell people this is how it must be, or it's not done right, or you're not doing a good job. That immediately shuts down most people, but especially teachers. They've invested time and heart and effort into supporting this kid, and for you to just come in and be like, "Nope, that's wrong," is incredibly defeating. And so I think that having watched BCBAs come from clinical environments into school-based settings with limited school-based experience, that is probably the biggest learning curve for them. In the clinical environment, you are the BCBA, you write the plans, the people do what you say. The plan doesn't work, you tell them more things to do. And that's just not what it looks like in public schools. And I definitely think that BCBAs in public schools is certainly growing. We've seen that over the past several years. Making that transition from clinical to school-based can definitely be a challenge, and you have to reframe the application of the science.
Yeah, I think that's a hugely important point. If you've been listening at all for the past however long, if you see me talk, I talk all the time about how school is a unique concept, a unique environment, and it's a unique application of our science, just as any other application of our science is a unique application. And we really do have to think about those contextual factors and making sure that our our science is applied in an effective and ethical way, but in a way that's also going to produce that meaningful and socially significant change that we're looking to find.
Yeah, I think the social validity part, we're certainly as a field as a whole talking about that more. Um, I also really have the pleasure of seeing in public schools a lot more um, opportunities for us to speak with students and get student input and student validity in the interventions that are being provided to them. And that makes my heart really happy. Because then again, we also see the intervention be more successful. What do you want? Well, I don't want a grown adult walking with me to every single one of my classes. Please don't give me a behavior aid. That's really valuable input because most people do not go into grown up jobs with an adult supporting them for every part of their job. Um,
I mean, it would be nice,
it
right?
really would be nice. I would get so much more done. I need somebody to call my daughter's orthodontist, like, please, please go do that.
Yep.
Yeah. So, I think the other thing that, I one of the guidelines that came out, this spring, was incorporating more of student strengths, into the functional behavior assessment, and I thought that was a really nice addition. Yeah, of course we should be talking about what kids can do. But you can kind of get into this very like, I'm only focused on interfering behaviors at the moment. And as a parent of a student with a disability who had an FBA and a BIP at one point in time, he doesn't anymore. Um, it can be really disheartening to go into a meeting and be like, your kid is doing all of these things. They're trashing the classroom. They're being aggressive towards people. It can be a really hard conversation. And so providing whatever balance that you can. I also really think language matters. And as much as we want to be technological and what we're saying and how we're saying it, I think that's another area where we have to be um, precise but more flexible in making it palatable to families. Um, there's a f I'm gonna give him a little soapbox for a second. Like, some of the things that bother me, like, I will hear sometimes individuals say, like, "They assaulted me," or "They beat this kid up," or, usually it's around some level of aggression, and, um, I believe the student isn't ag they're not aggressive, they engaged in aggression. And I think saying that something as a characteristic or a quality of an individual um, infers that it's not changeable. Instead of really just saying, this behavior happened and we are going to work on this behavior. And even though that's a very slight reframing, words matter. And I think that also even helps our teachers kind of reframe how do we handle and work with interfering behaviors um, that are not permanent. They don't have to be permanent. In fact, that's our whole job is to make them not permanent. And so even doing those slight shifts, I do know our state, we shifted away from things like problem behavior or challenging behavior to interfering behavior and being able to even explain that to teachers about why we made that change. Um, Not all behaviors are bad in certain situations. That interfering behavior, like sleeping, very appropriate in your bed at midnight. Not so appropriate in my math class at 10 o'clock.
Right.
And so I think even that slight shift that we've done has been meaningful in how people approach student behavior.
Your point about language is really well taken. And I think this is another one of those areas where behavior analysis has a lot to provide, even though it might not be something we think about a lot. So, for example, saying someone is the characteristic of a behavior versus someone is displaying a particular behavior are two very different things. And in behavior analysis, we don't assign behaviors as personal characteristics, we
Yeah.
separate them, right? This is something that you do, it's not necessarily something that you are. And I think you're right because then what that means is, well, if it's something you do, we can change that. We can support that. We can help you have a better response, right?
Yeah.
It's more socially appropriate, whatever the case may be. If this is who you are, then that's a very different mindset going into like how do we make this better for everybody?
Absolutely.
And certainly nobody wants to get hit, nobody wants to get kicked or spit on or all the things that can happen, and certainly I know we both have experienced those things,
Yeah,
but it doesn't mean that that's a bad person. It just means this
correct.
is what's going on right now, and we need to change the environment so that this doesn't have to happen this way.
Yeah, for sure.
So, and I also agree. I think I give Virginia a lot of credit for kind of trying to set some standards about some of those things so that we can have more productive conversations about students.
Absolutely.
Well, I actually think that's probably a good place to end, but do you have anything else that you want to add?
The only thing that I would say is learn to practice a lot of humility. Um, even when I worked in the public schools as a classroom teacher back in the day. I know that makes me sound very old.
Well, you've been
Uh,
doing this for 20 years, you
I
know.
know. Um, the classrooms have changed. And I know that that really sounds like an old person, like the kids are different. But I definitely do believe that post-pandemic, what kids are experiencing, what kids are bringing into the classroom as far as support needs does look different. And we have to be able to humble ourselves and say, maybe even the things that worked for me in the classroom or worked for me as a behavior analyst in another setting, maybe we have to get more creative. And to me, I think that's really the beauty of our science is that of problem solving. It's not one of knowing the answers.
I couldn't say it better. I think that that's a great place to end. So, Kira, thank you so much for your time today. This was a great conversation.
Happy to help anytime.
And to our listeners, we will see you on our next episode.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Behavior Education Connection. Join us next time for another great conversation about behavior analysis in the schools. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on an episode. Sending out a special thanks to the Virginia Department of Education for supporting our work. We look forward to connecting with you all again soon.